My parents proudly bought my sister a brand new house as a gift, but when it came to me, they handed over a stack of documents, revealing that I was the one expected to handle the payments. After years of being treated unfairly, we've finally decided to stop playing along with their favoritism, even if it means cutting ties for good. Can you believe your own parents would commit fraud in your name, then sue you for $500,000 when you said no? This isn't just a story about money, it's about the gut-wrenching moment you realize your family views you as nothing more than a bank account, and the fight to reclaim your life from their twisted definition of love. Hi, I'm Amber Wilson, 32 years old, and I'm a financial analyst living in Boston. For years, I poured my heart and soul into building a life for myself, something modest, but it was mine, comfortable, and hard-earned. So, imagine the sheer confusion when thick mortgage documents for a house I'd never even seen, let alone bought, arrived in my mail. My name was on it. My confusion quickly turned to a cold dread. And then came the bombshell, casually dropped by my parents. We've decided you should be the one to pay for your sister's mortgage. I stood there, utterly speechless. When I finally found my voice and refused, they didn't just back down. Oh no. They actually sued me. For $480,000. It spiraled into a nightmare that ripped my family apart and dragged us into court. To truly understand how things got so catastrophically messed up between me and my family, you need a little backstory on the Wilson family dynamics. I grew up in a middle-class town in Connecticut, with my parents, Eleanor and Richard Wilson, and my younger sister, Heather, who's 4 years younger than me. From as far back as I can remember, there was always this glaring imbalance in how my parents treated us. I was the designated responsible one, the achiever, the one who had to have it all together. Meanwhile, Heather? She was coddled, protected, and honestly, completely spoiled. If I brought home a B+ on a test, the question wasn't good job, it was why wasn't it an A? But if Heather scraped by with a C? My parents would throw a celebration, buy her something nice, just to encourage her. Our home wasn't overtly abusive, nothing dramatic like that. It was just saturated with these subtle, insidious inequities that you don't even fully process until you're an adult looking back. Like I got a used bicycle for my 16th birthday, while Heather, 4 years later, got a brand new car for hers. Or how I had to juggle multiple part-time jobs all through high school just to help out, while Heather's only responsibility was being a teenager. I was the first in our family to ever go to college. I literally worked myself to the bone for a partial scholarship to Boston University, took out student loans for the rest, and worked 20 hours a week at the campus library just to cover my living expenses. My parents? They contributed exactly $0 to my education. Their excuse? They needed to save for Heather's future. I didn't resent it back then. I was actually fiercely proud of my independence, my grit. Heather, on the other hand, bounced between 3 different colleges over 5 years, never even close to completing a degree. My parents footed her full tuition bill every single time, covered her apartment, gave her endless spending money, and never once questioned when she just dropped out to find herself. By the time she was 23, they'd blown well over $150,000 on her abandoned educational pursuits, while I was still chipping away at my own student loans. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a financial firm in Boston. I lived with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment, ate ramen noodles more often than I care to admit, and funneled every spare dollar into my student debt. It took 5 grueling years of living like that, along with several hard-won promotions, before I could finally afford my own 1-bedroom apartment. I built an emergency fund, started contributing to my 401k, and finally, paid off my student loans by age 30. Financial independence was something I had fought tooth and nail for, and I was damn proud of it. Meanwhile, Heather? She bounced from retail to waitressing to administrative work, never sticking anywhere longer than a few months. She lived in my parents' basement, rent-free, until she was 27. And when she finally moved out? My parents co-signed her lease, paid her security deposit, and even furnished her apartment as a housewarming gift. Can you even imagine? Throughout our 20s, there were countless instances where my parents just expected me to bail out Heather financially. When her car broke down, my mother wouldn't call a mechanic. No, she'd call me. "You're so good with money," she'd coo. "Surely you can spare a few $100s for your sister's car repair? She really needs it for work." Or, when Heather decided she wanted to go on some spontaneous vacation with friends but couldn't afford it, my father would call, casually suggesting I treat her as a birthday gift, even if her actual birthday was months away. Each time, I felt this crushing mixture of resentment and obligation. I'd usually give in, telling myself, it's just a one-time thing. Family helps family, right? But it was never just once. It became an unspoken, deeply ingrained expectation that since I was doing well, I should just subsidize my sister's entire lifestyle. Family gatherings became increasingly tense as I entered my 30s. I'd casually mention a promotion or a small investment I'd made, and my mother would immediately hijack the conversation, steering it towards how Heather was struggling to make rent or how her credit card debt was stressing her out. The implication was always crystal clear: your success means you should be solving her problems. Last Thanksgiving was particularly uncomfortable. I'd just been promoted to senior financial analyst, which came with a pretty significant salary increase. I made the mistake of mentioning it when my aunt innocently asked how work was going. Within minutes, my father pulled me aside. "Amber," he said, his voice low, "would you consider helping out with Heather's debt consolidation loan? She's drowning in interest payments. With your new position, it would barely make a dent in your finances." I deflected, mumbled something like, "I need to look at my budget." But as we were leaving, I overheard my mother telling Heather, "Don't worry, we'll figure something out with Amber. She just doesn't understand how the real world works for normal people." The sheer, breathtaking irony of that statement, coming from someone who had never allowed my sister to experience the actual real world, was not lost on me. Not for 1 second. Despite all this, despite the constant pressure and the blatant favoritism, I still craved my family's approval. I desperately wanted them to be proud of what I'd accomplished through sheer hard work and discipline. I wanted them to see that I'd built something meaningful, something substantial, without the safety net they'd always so freely provided my sister. Deep down, I think I was still that little girl, hopelessly hoping that if I just achieved enough, they'd finally see me as worthy of the same love and unwavering support they lavished on Heather. That hope, however misguided and utterly naive, was about to be shattered in the most devastating way imaginable. It was an ordinary Tuesday in April. I got home from work, grabbed the mail, bills, flyers, the usual suspects. But then there was a thick envelope from Massachusetts Bay Mortgage Company. Thinking it was just some junk mail, I almost tossed it right into the recycling bin. But for some reason, a gut feeling, I decided to open it. Inside, my blood ran cold. A complete set of mortgage documents. For a property at 247 Oakwood Drive in Winchester, Massachusetts, a pretty affluent suburb, about 20 minutes from Boston. My name was right there, listed as the borrower. A whopping $480,000 loan. The monthly payment? A staggering $2,850 for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. I had never applied for this. I had never even seen this house. Yet there it was. My signature, or what looked horrifyingly like my signature, on several of the documents. My mind raced. Identity theft? Fraud? I immediately called the mortgage company, but of course, it was after business hours. I left an urgent, panicked message about potential fraud and identity theft, then spent a completely sleepless night, tossing and turning, my mind screaming, how? How could this have happened? The very next morning, before I could even follow up with the mortgage company, my mother called. "Did you get the mortgage papers?" she asked, her voice impossibly casual, like she was asking if I'd received a birthday card. "Mom, what is going on?" I practically screamed into the phone. "These papers have my name on them, for a house I know absolutely nothing about." "Well, that's what we need to discuss," she said, completely unfazed. "Your father and I think it's time we all got together for dinner. Can you come over tonight? Heather will be there too." My stomach instantly nodded. "Mom, I need to know what's happening now. Is this some kind of identity theft?" "Don't be so dramatic, Amber," she sighed, her tone dismissive. "It's a family matter. We'll explain everything tonight." 6. She hung up before I could even protest. I called in sick to work, something I almost never do, and spent the entire day in a suffocating fog of anxiety and confusion. It was pure torture. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Connecticut, the same house where I'd grown up. Heather's car was already in the driveway, a relatively new Honda Civic, of course, that my parents had conveniently helped her finance just 2 years ago. When I walked in, they were all sitting in the living room, looking unnervingly calm. My mother, without even asking, poured me a glass of wine. My father gestured to the armchair directly across from them, positioning me like I was in a job interview, not a family dinner. Amber, my father began, his voice laced with forced patience, we know you're confused about the mortgage documents, but we've been planning this for a while. Planning what exactly? I asked, my voice tight, the wine untouched on the coffee table between us. Well, as you know, Heather has been renting that overpriced apartment in Cambridge, my mother chimed in, a saccharine sweetness in her tone. And with the housing market being what it is, we thought it was time she owned something. That's nice, I said, trying to sound cautiously neutral. But what does that have to do with me? My father cleared his throat. We found a perfect starter home in Winchester. Good neighborhood, good schools for when she eventually has children, convenient location. The thing is, my mother continued cutting him off, her voice laced with false concern, with Heather's credit history and employment situation, she couldn't qualify for a mortgage on her own. And then, the cold, sickening realization began to seep in. My blood ran cold. So you used my information? My credit? My income? My voice was rising, laced with disbelief, with each terrifying question. Now don't get upset, my father said sternly, shutting down my rising panic. We've decided that you should be the one to pay for this mortgage. I just stared at them, in utter, gut-wrenching disbelief. You've decided? Without asking me? Without my consent? You're doing so well in your career, my mother said, as if that explained everything, as if my success was a weapon they could wield. Your sister needs this house. And family takes care of family. Heather, who had been completely silent until now, finally spoke, her voice dripping with entitlement. It's not like you can't afford it, Amber. You're always talking about your promotions and investments. Meanwhile, I can barely make rent each month. Because you've never kept a job for more than a few months. I exploded. And even if I could afford it, which, by the way, I absolutely cannot without completely derailing my own financial future, that doesn't give anyone the right to commit fraud in my name. Fraud is a very ugly word, my mother said, frowning, her face a mask of fake disapproval. We're family. How did you even do this? I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. How did you get my signature? My financial information? My father shifted uncomfortably. We still had your old tax returns from when you lived at home, and your mother, well, she's always been good at copying signatures. I felt physically ill. My stomach churned. So you forged my signature on legal documents? Do you have any idea how serious this is? This is identity theft. This is fraud. This is a crime. Don't be so dramatic, Heather scoffed, rolling her eyes. It's not like we're strangers taking advantage of you. We're your family. A family, I shouted now, unable to contain the torrent of fury and disbelief, that apparently thinks it's okay to steal my identity, and saddle me with $500,000 of debt without my permission. Lower your voice, my father commanded, his own voice tight with anger. The decision has been made. The house has already been purchased. Heather moves in next week. The decision has not been made. I yelled, standing up so abruptly my chair scraped against the floor. I did not agree to this, and I will not be paying for a mortgage I didn't sign up for. What are you saying? My mother asked, her voice dangerous and low, a viper's hiss. I'm saying no. Absolutely not. I will not pay a single penny toward this mortgage. And tomorrow, I'm reporting this as fraud to the police and the mortgage company. There was a moment of stunned, deathly silence. And then, all hell broke loose. Heather burst into tears, wailing like her life was ending, shrieking about how I was ruining her life. My mother immediately launched into a familiar tirade, listing all the sacrifices they'd supposedly made for me over the years, most of which were complete fabrications. My father, his face contorted with rage, threatened to disown me. Do the right thing for once in your selfish life, he bellowed. The right thing? I laughed bitterly, a hollow, humorless sound. The right thing would have been to teach Heather financial responsibility instead of enabling her dependence. The right thing would have been to respect me enough to at least ask before committing a felony in my name. I grabbed my purse, my hand shaking, and headed for the door. My mother followed me, her eyes blazing, grabbing my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. If you walk out that door, she hissed, you're no longer part of this family. I looked her straight in the eye, my own eyes probably blazing back. If being part of this family means letting you destroy my financial future and break the law, then maybe I don't want to be part of it anymore. I drove home that night, tears streaming down my face, oscillating wildly between pure rage, profound betrayal, and a crushing, suffocating grief. The family I'd spent my entire life trying so desperately to please had just revealed the true, ugly extent of their disregard for me. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an ATM. With an inconveniently independent mind. The morning after that disastrous family dinner, I called my friend Jessica. She works as a paralegal at a firm specializing in financial crimes, and I needed help. My voice was still shaking with anger and disbelief as I explained the entire twisted situation. "Amber, this is serious," Jessica said after listening patiently. "What your parents did is identity theft and mortgage fraud. These are federal crimes, with serious penalties." "I know," I said, feeling sick to my stomach. "But they're my parents. And it would destroy my sister if they went to jail." "Look," Jessica replied, her voice firm, "I'm not saying you need to press criminal charges right away. But you absolutely need to protect yourself legally and financially. This mortgage is in your name. If payments aren't made, it's your credit score that will tank. Your future that will be affected." Jessica connected me with Rachel Goldstein, an attorney at her firm who incredibly agreed to see me pro bono for an initial consultation. Rachel didn't mince words. "We need to document everything," she said. "Then, we need to formally notify the mortgage company, the property records office, and potentially the police, that this mortgage was obtained fraudulently, without your consent." "Will my parents go to jail?" I asked, still so conflicted despite their profound betrayal. "That depends on whether you choose to press criminal charges," Rachel explained. "But regardless, you need to legally separate yourself from this mortgage before any payments are due." Over the next week, I became a detective. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, the forged documents, emails and text messages from my parents that, chillingly, basically admitted what they'd done, and a meticulous timeline of events. Rachel helped me draft a formal, icy letter to my parents, sent by certified mail, stating unequivocally that I would not accept responsibility for the mortgage, that I was fully aware of the fraud committed in my name, and that I would be taking all necessary legal steps to protect myself. 3 days after they would have received my letter, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. "Amber, this childish tantrum has gone on long enough," his voice boomed from my phone speaker, full of self-righteous fury. "Your mother is beside herself, and Heather has been crying for days. You need to grow up and accept your family responsibilities. Call us immediately so we can sort this out like adults." I didn't call back. Instead, I followed Rachel's advice and sent formal notifications to the mortgage company and the county property records office, along with a sworn affidavit stating that my signature had been forged. That's when things really escalated. My parents started calling me multiple times a day from different numbers, trying to get around my call blocking. My mother actually showed up at my workplace, creating a dramatic scene in the lobby until security had to escort her out. My father emailed my boss, claiming I was mentally unstable and making false accusations against family members. Thankfully, my boss recognized this for the hot garbage it was and was incredibly supportive of me. Heather, meanwhile, launched what I can only describe as a full-blown smear campaign on social media. She posted tearful, manipulated videos about how her successful sister was trying to make her homeless out of spite. She shared screenshots of text conversations between us, edited to make me look heartless. She even created a GoFundMe titled "Abandoned by My Sister When I Needed Her Most," which somehow raised several $1,000s based on a completely fictionalized, self-serving version of events. The extended family got involved too. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had incredibly strong opinions about my selfish behavior. Some sent me lengthy, guilt-tripping messages about family loyalty. Others just unfriended and blocked me on social media without even hearing my side. It was like I was living in some twisted reality show. Only my maternal grandmother, Ruth, reached out with genuine, heartbreaking concern. "Amber, honey," she whispered on the phone, "there seems to be a lot happening with your parents and sister. I'm not taking sides, but I'm here if you need to talk. I love you." That single, beautiful message of unconditional support made me break down in tears. It was the only lifeline from my family that didn't come wrapped in manipulation. Meanwhile, the mortgage company's fraud department had opened an investigation, but they warned me it could take months to resolve. And until it was resolved, that terrifying mortgage remained technically in my name, a fact that was already completely tanking my credit score and making it impossible to make any other major financial decisions. The stress began affecting every aspect of my life. I had trouble sleeping, often waking up from nightmares about being homeless or in prison for debts I didn't incur. My performance at work slipped, prompting a concerned check-in from my manager. I stopped going to my weekly yoga class, stopped seeing friends, stopped doing much of anything beyond going to work and coming home to stare anxiously at my email for updates from Rachel or the mortgage company. I was a shell of myself. Then came the ultimatum. My father left a voicemail that chilled me to the bone. "Amber, this is your final warning," his voice thundered. "Your mother and I have consulted with our attorney. If you don't withdraw your fraud claims and take responsibility for your sister's mortgage by the end of this week, we will be filing a lawsuit against you for the full value of the house. You might think you're clever with your fancy Boston lawyer, but we have decades of evidence of verbal agreements and family commitments that any judge will recognize. Don't test us on this." I immediately forwarded that chilling voicemail to Rachel, who called me within minutes. "They're bluffing," she assured me, her voice calm and steady. "There's no such thing as enforceable verbal agreements about taking on someone else's $500,000 mortgage. And family commitments aren't legally binding contracts. So I should ignore the threat?" I asked, desperately hoping for a simple answer. Rachel paused. "Not exactly. Frivolous or not, if they do file a lawsuit, you'll need to respond. And defending yourself, even against baseless claims, can be incredibly expensive and stressful. What should I do?" "Continue documenting everything. Don't engage directly with them. And Amber," she added, her voice softening, "you might want to consider filing for a restraining order, given the escalating harassment." A restraining order? Against my own parents. The suggestion was so surreal that I actually laughed despite myself. But the laughter quickly turned to bitter, heartbroken tears as the full, horrifying weight of the situation crashed down on me again. How had it come to this? How had the people who were supposed to love and protect me become the very ones I needed legal protection from? 4 days later it happened. I was served with lawsuit papers at my own apartment. My parents were indeed suing me. For $480,000. The full value of the house they had fraudulently purchased in my name. Their legal complaint was a perverse masterpiece of manipulation and revisionist history. It claimed that I had verbally agreed to purchase a home for my sister, that I had reneged on a family pact, and that they had acted as my agents in good faith. It was utterly absurd, infuriating, and terrifying all at once. Because regardless of how baseless their claims were, I was now facing a real, legitimate lawsuit that could drain every penny of my savings, utterly destroy my professional reputation, and drag on for months, maybe even years. As I sat on my couch that night, legal papers scattered all around me, I hit my absolute lowest point. I felt utterly alone, completely abandoned. The family I had spent a lifetime trying to please had not only profoundly betrayed me but was now actively trying to annihilate the independence I had worked so incredibly hard to build. For a time, a fleeting moment, I actually allowed myself to wonder if I would be better off just giving in. Paying the mortgage. Accepting the devastating financial setback. Trying to salvage whatever fractured remnants remained of my family relationships. But as the thought formed, a surge of fierce, cold clarity cut through the emotional fog. No. This wasn't about money anymore. Not really. This was about standing up. Standing up to decades of manipulation, of unequal treatment, of being treated like a doormat. This was about refusing to be financially abused by the very people who should have been my biggest supporters, my strongest cheerleaders. I picked up my phone, my hand steady. I called Rachel. "They're actually suing me," I said when she answered. "And I want to fight this. All the way." The lawsuit my parents filed against me was officially titled Wilson and Wilson vs. Wilson, a painfully ironic reflection of how family had truly turned against family. The complaint was 37 pages long, a dense thicket of allegations ranging from breach of verbal contract to unjust enrichment to familial fraud, that last one not even being a real legal concept. Rachel reviewed it, and confirmed what she had suspected. It was a legally flimsy case, designed primarily to intimidate me into compliance. But flimsy or not, I still needed to respond formally within 21 days, or risk a default judgment against me. "I can help with the initial response," Rachel offered, "but for a case this complex, you really need a litigation attorney who specializes in family financial disputes." The problem, of course, was that litigation attorneys are expensive. Prohibitively so, for someone with a decent but not extravagant salary like mine. Rachel provided me with several referrals, and after consultations with 3 different lawyers, I settled on Marcus Bennett. He had a strong track record in cases involving family financial exploitation. His retainer? A gut-punching $10,000. It represented almost every single dollar of my emergency fund, money I had painstakingly saved over years of careful budgeting. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Wilson," Marcus said during our first official meeting. "This case has no legal merit whatsoever. Your parents have no grounds to force you to pay for a mortgage you didn't consent to, especially one obtained through forged documents." "That's good news, right?" I asked, a flicker of hope. "Yes and no," he replied. "The good news is that we should eventually win. The bad news is that, eventually, could be a long and expensive road. Your parents' strategy appears to be to drain you financially and emotionally until you give up and settle." Marcus helped me file a comprehensive, point-by-point answer to their absurd complaint, denying all allegations and asserting powerful counterclaims for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation, based on the malicious false statements my family had made about me publicly. We also filed a motion to dismiss the case entirely, arguing that there was no legal basis for their utterly ridiculous claims. But as Marcus had warned, the legal system moves at a glacial pace. The judge assigned to our case, Caroline Reeves, set a hearing date for the motion to dismiss, 3 months away. 3 agonizing months. In the meantime, my life continued to unravel. The mortgage company's fraud investigation was dragging on, and they informed me that until it was resolved, that terrifying mortgage remained technically in my name. This wasn't just technical, it was a concrete hammer blow to my credit score, making it impossible for me to make any other major financial decisions. My sister Heather had, indeed, moved into the house at the center of the dispute, posting smug photos on Instagram of her new home with captions like "So blessed" and "Dreams do come true when you have people who love you." Each post felt like a deliberate twist of the knife, a cruel mockery. The financial strain became increasingly severe. Between the legal retainer, the ongoing attorney fees, and the time I had to take off work for depositions and meetings with Marcus, I was rapidly depleting my savings. I had to cancel a planned vacation, stop contributing to my 401k, and worst of all, start using credit cards for basic expenses like groceries, something I had proudly avoided since my ramen-eating post-college years. The emotional toll was even worse. I lost 10 pounds in a month because I simply couldn't stomach food. My hair started falling out in clumps from sheer stress. I had terrifying panic attacks in the middle of the night, waking up gasping for air, convinced I was drowning in invisible debt. My few remaining friends tried to be supportive, but it was clear they were utterly baffled by the situation. "Can't you just work this out?" they'd ask, shaking their heads. "They're your family, after all. Or worse, maybe you should consider helping your sister if you can afford it. Family is forever." These well-intentioned but clueless comments only deepened my isolation, making me feel even more alone. No one seemed to understand the fundamental violation that had occurred, how my own parents had weaponized my financial responsibility against me, how they had committed actual crimes in my name, how they were now trying to legally strong-arm me into subsidizing my adult sister's lavish lifestyle. Even my therapist, whom I started seeing weekly just to cope with the crushing anxiety, seemed to subtly suggest that perhaps there was a compromise to be found. "Sometimes in family conflicts, winning the battle means losing the war," she said during one session. "What would it mean to you to preserve these relationships, even at some financial cost?" I didn't return to her practice after that session. I didn't need someone else suggesting that I should sacrifice my financial well-being on the altar of toxic family dynamics. Not anymore. 3 months into the lawsuit, my parents' attorney approached Marcus with a settlement offer. It was a joke. I would take over the mortgage payments for 5 years, after which the house would supposedly be refinanced in Heather's name, assuming she could magically qualify by then. And my parents would drop the lawsuit. Marcus presented the offer without recommendation, simply asking what I wanted to do. I sat in his office, staring blankly at the settlement document, a complete turmoil of emotions churning inside me. Part of me, the utterly exhausted, financially drained, emotionally depleted part, was so tempted to accept. Just to end the nightmare. 5 years of mortgage payments would be crippling, absolutely, but perhaps not completely ruinous. I could recover, eventually. But then, I thought about what accepting would really mean. It would mean that my parents' manipulative tactics had worked. It would mean that forging my signature, stealing my identity, and then suing me when I objected was a successful strategy. It would mean signing up for 5 more years of financial control and psychological manipulation. No, I said finally, my voice stronger, clearer than it had been in months. I won't settle. Not for 5 years. Not for 5 months. Not for 5 minutes. What they did was wrong. And I won't validate it by giving in now. Marcus nodded slowly, a subtle hint of approval in his expression. I'll convey your response, Ms. Wilson. And for what it's worth, I think you're making the right call. The night before our court date for the motion to dismiss, I hit rock bottom. Sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, unpaid bills, and the cold remnants of a dinner I couldn't even finish, I broke down completely. I sobbed until I could barely breathe, great, heaving cries that seemed to come from the deepest, most primal part of me. I cried for the little girl who had always tried so hard to earn her parents' approval. I cried for the young woman who had put herself through college without a single shred of support. I cried for the adult who had painstakingly built a life of financial responsibility, only to have it brutally threatened by the very people who should have been proudest of her achievements. And as the tears finally subsided, I felt something shift deep within me. The grief was still there, heavy and raw, but alongside it was a steely, unyielding resolve. I would not be broken by this. I would not let them win. Whatever happened in court tomorrow, I would face it with the same quiet determination that had carried me through every other challenge in my life. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady, and texted Marcus, I'm ready for tomorrow. Whatever it takes. His response came quickly, get some rest. I'll see you at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. And Amber, you're stronger than you know. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without nightmares. A true miracle. The county courthouse was an imposing, cold stone building that seemed designed specifically to intimidate. I arrived at 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than planned, wearing my most professional navy blue suit and sensible, low heels. Marcus met me on the courthouse steps, briefcase in hand, a reassuring confidence in his stride. Remember, he said as we walked through the bustling security checkpoint, Judge Reeves has a reputation for being thorough and fair, but she doesn't tolerate emotional appeals in place of legal arguments. Let me do the talking unless she directly addresses you. We were directed to courtroom 4B, where several other cases were scheduled before ours. My heart hammered. And then I spotted them. My parents and Heather, sitting on the opposite side of the gallery. All 3 dressed in conservative, almost theatrical outfits that screamed respectable, wronged family. My mother clutched a handkerchief, as if already prepared to dab at perfectly timed, theatrical tears. My father sat rigidly upright, jaw clenched, wearing that familiar expression I'd known since childhood, the one that meant he expected complete, unquestioning compliance. Heather kept her eyes down, but I caught her shooting me a quick, venomous glance when she thought I wasn't looking. Their attorney, Lawrence Peterson, was a silver-haired man in an impossibly expensive suit who exuded smug confidence. He nodded curtly in Marcus's direction but didn't even acknowledge my existence. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Caroline Reeves entered. She was a black woman in her late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. She moved through the preliminary cases efficiently, but not rushingly, giving each matter her full, unwavering attention before moving to the next. At 10:45 a.m., the bailiff finally called Wilson and Wilson versus Wilson. My stomach clenched, a cold knot of dread. Marcus and I approached the plaintiff's table, while my parents and their attorney, Peterson, took their places at the defense table. We're here on the defendant's motion to dismiss, Judge Reeves stated, looking down at the file before her. I've reviewed the complaint, the answer, and all supporting documents. Attorney Bennett, as the moving party you may begin. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket with a deliberate movement. Thank you, Your Honor. This case should be dismissed with prejudice because it fails to state any valid legal claim upon which relief can be granted. The plaintiffs, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, are attempting to enforce a non-existent verbal agreement that their daughter, my client, Amber Wilson, would pay for a mortgage for a house purchased for their other daughter, Heather Wilson. He proceeded to methodically, calmly, dismantle each and every ridiculous claim in my parents' lawsuit. He pointed out, unequivocally, that no evidence existed of any agreement, that verbal contracts for real estate transactions were unenforceable under the statute of frauds, and most damningly, that my parents had admitted in writing to forging my signature on mortgage documents, a federal crime. Furthermore, Your Honor, Marcus continued, his voice firm and clear, "we have filed a counterclaim for the severe emotional distress caused by this incessant harassment campaign, as well as for the profound damage to Miss Wilson's credit score and financial standing resulting from the fraudulent mortgage." Judge Reeves listened attentively, her face unreadable, occasionally making careful notes. When Marcus finished, Judge Reeves turned to Attorney Peterson, counsel for the plaintiffs. "Your response?" Peterson rose with a dramatic flourish, puffing up his chest. "Your Honor," he began, his voice oozing sincerity, "this case is fundamentally about family obligations and implied contracts that exist within the unique, sacred context of family relationships. The Wilsons," he continued, gesturing grandly towards my parents, "raised their daughter, provided for her education, and supported her career aspirations. In return, there was an understanding that when her sister needed assistance, Amber would provide it. I had to bite my tongue so hard I thought it would bleed to keep from yelling out the truth, that my parents had contributed nothing to my education, and that any understanding existed solely in their own delusional imaginations. Marcus had warned me to maintain a neutral expression, no matter what lies were spun, but it took every ounce of self-control I possessed." Peterson continued, his voice taking on a sickly sweet, dramatic quality. "The Wilsons acted as agents for their daughter in securing this mortgage, believing in good faith that she had agreed to help her sister achieve the American dream of home ownership. Only after the purchase was complete did Miss Wilson renege on this family commitment, leaving her parents with no choice but to seek legal remedy." Judge Reeves's expression remained neutral, but her next question, delivered with quiet precision, suggested deep skepticism. "Counselor, are you arguing that parents have an inherent legal right to forge their adult child's signature on mortgage documents based on a presumed family commitment?" Peterson faltered slightly, his smug facade cracking. Not in those exact terms, Your Honor, but within the context of this specific family dynamic." "Let's be very clear," Judge Reeves interrupted, her voice gaining an edge of steel. "The complaint itself acknowledges that Miss Wilson's signature was applied to these documents without her physical presence. Are the plaintiffs disputing that this occurred?" "They're not disputing the signature issue, Your Honor," Peterson admitted, visibly sweating, "but they maintain that they had implied authority to act on her behalf, based on previous family financial arrangements." Judge Reeves raised an eyebrow, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture that spoke volumes. "I'd like to hear directly from the plaintiffs on this point. Mr. Wilson, please approach." My father stood and walked to the witness stand, where he was sworn in. His testimony was a masterclass in revisionist history and blatant emotional manipulation. "Your Honor, we've always been a close family that helps each other," he began, his voice warm and paternal, dripping with feigned sincerity. "When Amber was succeeding in her career, we were so proud. We naturally assumed, based on our family values, that she would want to help her sister, who hasn't been as fortunate." "Did you specifically ask Miss Wilson if she would take on a $480,000 mortgage for her sister before you completed these documents?" Judge Reeves asked, her voice calm but penetrating. "Well, not in those exact words," my father hedged, his gaze darting nervously. "But we've had many conversations over the years about Heather's housing situation and Amber's responsibility, as the successful sibling, to help out. So that's a no," Judge Reeves stated flatly, cutting through his evasiveness. "You did not explicitly ask, and she did not explicitly agree." "It was understood," my father insisted, his voice rising in frustration. "Mr. Wilson, understanding that you are under oath," Judge Reeves continued, her voice hardening, laced with quiet authority, "did you or did you not forge your daughter's signature on these mortgage documents?" My father shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "I wouldn't use the word forge, Your Honor. My wife signed on Amber's behalf because we genuinely believed she would want to help her sister." Judge Reeves's expression hardened further, her eyes piercing him. "Mr. Wilson, signing someone else's name without their express permission is the definition of forgery. It doesn't matter if that person is your daughter or a complete stranger." My mother was called next and delivered a truly Oscar-worthy, tearful performance about how I had abandoned my family responsibilities, and how they had only acted out of desperate concern for Heather's well-being. Heather followed with her own testimony, painting herself as the ultimate victim of my financial beatdown and selfish success. Throughout their testimonies, Marcus made occasional objections when their statements veered into blatant hearsay or unsubstantiated claims, most of which Judge Reeves quickly sustained. She was having none of it. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep, steadying breath and reminded myself to stick to the cold, hard facts. I explained how I had painstakingly put myself through college without a single shred of parental support. How I had painstakingly built my financial stability through years of careful planning and deeply personal sacrifices. And how I had never, not once, not ever, agreed to take on a mortgage for my sister. Miss Wilson, Judge Reeves asked, her gaze direct, have there been previous instances where your parents made financial decisions on your behalf without your consent? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, and proceeded to detail several smaller, insidious instances over the years. Credit card applications submitted in my name, loan co-signing I hadn't agreed to, tax returns filed on my behalf without my review. And did you confront them about these incidents? She pressed. I did, Your Honor, I answered, my voice firm. Each time, they dismissed my concerns, saying it was just family helping family, and that I was being unnecessarily formal about money matters. During cross-examination, Peterson, my parents' attorney, tried to portray me as cold and uncaring, asking loaded, manipulative questions like, isn't it true that you've consistently put your own financial interests above your sister's well-being? And would it really have been such a hardship to help your struggling sister when you're doing so well financially? Marcus, bless his heart, objected to most of these questions as argumentative, and Judge Reeves quickly sustained the objections, occasionally reminding Peterson, in no uncertain terms, to stick to legally relevant questions. But the most damning, absolutely jaw-dropping evidence came during the final phase of the hearing, when Marcus introduced a series of text messages and emails between my parents that I had only recently discovered through the legal discovery process. They were pure gold. In one chilling exchange, my father had written to my mother, Amber will never agree to this if we ask directly. Better to move forward and present it as a fait accompli. She's always been too independent for her own good. In another, my mother had chillingly replied, once the papers are signed and Heather's moved in, what can she really do? She won't let her sister become homeless no matter how much she complains. These messages weren't just evidence. They revealed the cold, calculated, premeditated nature of their actions. They completely obliterated their testimony about implied authority and family understanding. As the hearing concluded, Judge Reeves looked at all parties over the rim of her stylish glasses. I'll take this matter under advisement and issue my ruling within 10 days, she stated, her voice clear and authoritative. But I want to be very clear about something. Family relationships, no matter how close, do not override basic legal principles about consent, contracts, and identity theft. Court is adjourned. As we gathered our papers, I caught my mother's eye across the courtroom. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even a sliver of regret, in her expression. But it was quickly replaced by the familiar, impenetrable mask of righteous indignation as she sharply turned away. You did well, Marcus told me as we exited the courthouse, the imposing building now feeling less intimidating. The judge seemed receptive to our arguments, and those text messages were particularly compelling. But legal victories rarely feel satisfying in family cases. Are you prepared for that? I nodded slowly, a profound sense of calm settling over me. I think I realized something important in there today. This was never really about the money. It was about respect. Or the painful, crushing lack of it. They've never respected me as an independent adult with the right to make my own choices. And now, Marcus asked, his eyes steady on mine. Now, I said, meeting his gaze, I need to respect myself enough to hold that boundary. Whatever the judge decides. As we parted ways on the courthouse steps, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The outcome still hung in the balance,